The snow came down like silence made visible, soft, steady, and absolute. 1,000 flakes fell with every breath, muffling the world into white. And in the middle of it, beneath the sagging limbs of a frost-bitten pine tree, 2 girls sat motionless. Red sweaters, torn at the sleeves, bare feet sunk deep into the freezing crust, cheeks mottled from windburn and cold. One cried quietly, her small shoulders shaking, lips trembling as she tried to form words that no longer had the strength to come. The other sat still, not calm, still. Her eyes, grey and too wide for her young face, stared into the forest like she was waiting for it to decide something. Ellie was the one who cried. Emma, the quieter twin, finally whispered, voice cracking into the empty woods. She said, "We're too much trouble." So she left, her sister hiccuped a sob. Their bodies huddled closer, but the cold found its way between every thread of wool. The tree offered no shelter, no tracks marked their arrival. They hadn't gotten lost, they'd been abandoned. The snow deepened. No voices called their names, no flashlights pierced the woods. Then came the bark. Short, sharp, alert. From the line of trees, a large German shepherd stepped into the clearing. Sable and black, his coat dusted in white, his eyes sharp as winter stars. His name was Axel. He didn't charge, he didn't growl, he didn't bark again. He watched. And then, from the shadows behind him, came a man. Late 40s, heavy boots, a forest green coat stretched over broad shoulders hunched against wind. His name was Lucas Hart. Lucas paused at the tree line, scanning the scene like a man trained not to believe what he sees until he checks twice. When his eyes settled on the girls, he didn't speak. Not right away. Axel moved first. The dog approached in a wide arc, not straight. His steps were calculated, the kind taught in K-9 units meant for field rescues and search patterns. But there was no aggression. Only purpose. Emma flinched as Axel came close. Ellie pressed her face into her sister's side. Axel stopped just short of touching them. Then he whined, low, rising at the end, as if asking a question. Emma turned her face toward him. Her hand reached out, fingers trembling, and brushed the thick fur on his neck. Axel didn't move. Then, her voice again, barely more than breath. "He's not leaving." Lucas stepped forward finally. The sight of them knocked something loose in his chest. He'd seen trauma before, on city streets, in courtrooms, in war zones of memory. But this was different. This was tiny, fragile, deliberate. "Hey there," he said softly, pulling off his gloves despite the biting cold. "My name's Lucas. That's Axel. He's a good boy. You don't have to be afraid." Ellie's crying had slowed, but she still didn't look up. Emma stared at Lucas like he was another snowflake. Unreal. Temporary. Lucas crouched, wincing at the ice under his knees. "Can I get you somewhere warm?" Neither girl answered, but they didn't run. That was enough. Lucas shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around their shoulders. It swallowed them whole. He reached for the radio clipped to his belt, thumbed it on, but got nothing. The storm had wiped out signal. Axel turned, looking back the way they came, ears twitching. He didn't bark, but his stance said everything. "Move. Now." Lucas didn't hesitate. He scooped Ellie into his arms, grunted at the dead weight of cold limbs and wet fabric, then held out a hand to Emma. She took it. Axel led, pushing snow aside like he belonged to the forest. They walked in silence, the wind scraping at Lucas's ears, the crunch of boots and paws the only sound. The hike back to the cabin was short but brutal. Lucas's thighs burned from carrying the child, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. His cabin appeared through the white haze like a secret too long kept. A one-room, wood-framed box of survival. The generator had frozen over days ago. No power, but the propane stove still worked. Enough for heat, enough to keep someone breathing. He set Ellie down on the couch, then helped Emma out of her soaked sweater. He moved on instinct, military, procedural, precise. Towels, socks, a mug of hot water with maple syrup. Axel curled in front of the fireplace, never looking away from the girls. The cabin lights flickered from the backup lanterns. The stove hummed. Lucas wrapped them in every blanket he owned, leaving himself with nothing but a flannel. He sat back on the floor, exhaling slowly. "You're safe here," he said, not knowing if it was true. Emma looked at him, then at Axel. Her voice came again, soft. "Are you going to take us back?" Lucas blinked. "Back where?" Emma didn't answer, but Ellie, her voice raspy from crying, said, "She said we don't listen enough. That we don't sleep enough. That we're too loud. Too much trouble." Lucas's jaw tightened. "She said someone else would find us." Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Then Axel stood. He padded to the couch, climbed up slowly, and lay down beside the girls. One of his front paws reached forward, gently, touching Emma's leg. Lucas didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as Ellie, without a word, rested her head on the dog's side and closed her eyes. Emma followed. Axel didn't blink. He just stayed. Lucas whispered to no one. "She left you out there." But he didn't. He stood and walked to the door, flung it open and stepped outside. The wind tore at his face. Snow lashed across the porch like it was trying to erase everything. But out there, in the darkness, someone had made a choice to abandon 2 kids. And in here, Axel had made a different one. Lucas scanned the woods. This wasn't over. Not yet. Lucas' heart hadn't meant to disappear. It just happened over time. A slow fade from the world after everything cracked and didn't quite heal the right way. He wasn't. Hiding not exactly. He just preferred the silence that the forest offered. Thick, unjudging, and indifferent to the scars under his skin. He had been a cop once. Good at it too. 12 years in the department. 6 of those as K-9 unit. Then came the call that changed everything. A hostage standoff on the edge of town. He went in with his partner and Axel, just another job, another tense negotiation. But things unraveled fast. A kid was caught in the crossfire. Axel got hit. Lucas blamed himself. Axel survived, but the limp never fully went away. The department offered desk duty. Lucas turned in his badge. That was 3 years ago. Now the 2 of them lived in a 1-room cabin in the snowbelt of Idaho, about 2 hours from the nearest town that still had a gas station. He didn't talk to neighbors. Didn't need to. He had wood to chop, traps to check. And Axel. Axel had stayed, even when Lucas hadn't asked him to. The morning before the storm, Lucas had been reading the same water-damaged paperback he always picked up when the snow kept him inside. Axel had been lying at the door, eyes half closed, but ears alert. Then something shifted. A sound outside that Lucas didn't hear, but Axel did. He stood, tail stiff, head tilted. Lucas watched the dog move toward the window, with the kind of attention only something serious could summon. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Axel didn't answer. He never did. But he nudged the door with his nose and gave Lucas a look that said, "Now." The storm hadn't hit yet, but the wind had already picked up. Still, Lucas grabbed his coat, his boots, and a flashlight, and followed Axel out into the woods. They didn't get far. Maybe 15 minutes into the trail, Axel stopped dead and growled. A low, vibrating sound that came from somewhere ancient. And there they were. The girls. Now, hours later, they were asleep in his cabin, wrapped in every blanket he owned. Lucas sat on the edge of a wooden stool, staring at the flickering shadows on the far wall. trying to make sense of how easily the silence he had built around himself was broken. He hadn't asked questions. Not when he found them. Not now. He didn't ask why they were there, why they were alone, why no one had come for them. He just knew he wasn't going to leave them in the snow. He ran a hand down his face and looked at Axel, who was lying between the girls and the door, chin resting on his paws, eyes open. Watching. Always watching. Lucas whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "You saw them before I did." Axel blinked slowly. Lucas turned to the wood stove and fed it another log. The cabin groaned as wind scraped across the roof. He moved to the small counter, filled a metal pot with water, and set it to boil. The girls hadn't eaten more than a few spoonfuls of oatmeal earlier. He'd try again in the morning. Then he heard it. A knock. No, more like a thud. He froze. Not from the door, from the side wall. Axel lifted his head. Ears pricked forward. A deep growl rumbled in his chest. Lucas stood slowly, stepping to the window. He saw nothing, just trees and white. Another thud. He grabbed the rifle from behind the door. Years of training came back in an instant. He moved to the side window and opened it slightly. Silence. Then a flash of movement. Just a blur. He cursed under his breath and closed the window, locking it tight. Axel moved to the door and sat. Lucas lowered his voice. "Someone's out there." He scanned the girls. Still asleep. Emma stirred, eyes fluttering open. She looked around, saw Axel, and settled back into sleep. Lucas waited. 15 minutes passed. Nothing else came. The storm must have tossed a branch loose, he told himself, but he didn't believe it. The next morning, the girls woke up slowly. Emma opened her eyes first. Ellie followed. Neither spoke at first. They sat with their backs pressed together, clutching Axel's fur as if he were an anchor. Lucas handed them warm mugs of sweetened water. Ellie whispered, "Where's the lady?" Lucas crouched beside the couch. "There's no lady here, just me." And Emma asked, "Are we staying?" Lucas paused. "You're safe. That's what matters." She looked at Axel. "She said we weren't worth it." Lucas didn't respond right away. Then Emma said something that stopped his breath cold. She said someone might come. But not to trust them, that they only pretend to care. Lucas looked at the door. Someone might come. So it wasn't over. He stood, picked up his notebook, and started writing everything down. Names he hadn't asked for yet. Descriptions, locations, the girls' injuries, what they said, what they didn't. He'd done this before, for cases, for statements, but never like this. The forest didn't keep secrets, it buried them. But Lucas had a dog who refused to look away. And now he had 2 girls who'd been left for dead in a storm that had no mercy. He didn't ask why, he just stayed. The old cabin didn't ask questions. It had weathered too many winters, groaned under too many storms. Built by Lucas's grandfather, patched up by his father, and inherited by a man who never planned to have anyone else in it, the place had been silent for years. But today, it breathed different air. Emma and Ellie sat bundled on the worn leather couch, wrapped in every blanket Lucas could find. The wood stove hissed softly behind them. Their cheeks, once blue and stiff, had regained a touch of color, but their eyes stayed guarded. Emma watched the room like it might collapse at any second. Ellie kept her arms crossed tight against her chest, fingers twisted in the blanket. Lucas moved around them without a sound. He was careful with his hands, his steps, his voice. When he spoke, it was low and even, like trying not to scare a bird from a branch. "I made oatmeal," he said, setting 2 bowls on the coffee table. "You don't have to eat much." "But it's warm. Might help no answer." Axel padded over, slow and deliberate, and lay down in front of the couch. His head rested between his paws, his eyes tilted up toward the girls. He didn't move, didn't demand, just waited. Emma's eyes flicked to him. Then her hand slipped out from under the blanket. She reached toward Axel's ear, touched it gently. He closed his eyes. Ellie spoke first, voice barely more than air. He's the only one who didn't leave. Lucas froze where he stood. His breath caught in his throat, but he didn't turn around. He gave the words space to echo. "I'm not leaving either," he said. Silence. Then Ellie leaned forward and picked up the spoon. By nightfall, the snow had thickened outside, clinging to the windows like a warning. Lucas sat at the edge of the room, flipping through the channels on the emergency radio. Static, static. Then a voice, faint but real. "This is County Dispatch." "Go ahead," Lucas grabbed the mic. "This is Hart. Lucas Hart. I'm up in the Timber Ridge sector near West Hollow. I found 2 kids in the woods, 2 girls, around 5 years old. They were alone, hypothermic. Barefoot." The line crackled. Then, "Say again." "Did you say you found children?" "Yes, 2, alive, in bad shape. I've got them at my cabin. I need someone up here." A SAP. Another pause. "Roads are closed past marker 17. Snowplows won't get to you until tomorrow morning. Can you shelter them for the night?" Lucas looked at the girls. Emma was asleep now, her head tucked into Ellie's shoulder. Axel hadn't moved from his post at their feet. "Yes, I can keep them warm." "Name and age of the children?" "They haven't said much yet. I only got their first names." "Emma and Ellie. Copy that. We'll enter a temporary custodial shelter order under your name until personnel can reach you. That makes you their legal guardian for the next 24 hours. Can you maintain a secure environment?" Lucas hesitated. He glanced at the rifle in the corner. At Axel, still alert. "Yes," he said. "I can. Stay on this channel. We'll check in every 30 minutes. The voice faded into static again. Lucas lowered the mic and leaned his head back. He hadn't planned on becoming anyone's guardian. He could barely keep himself together some days. He knew how to track prints, patch wounds, neutralize threats. But brushing a girl's tangled hair or knowing how to answer why someone left them in the woods, that was different. He stood and crossed to the small pantry. A can of soup, some rice, a loaf of bread starting to harden. Not much. Enough for tonight. Axel lifted his head, tracking Lucas's movement. Lucas whispered, "I don't even know where to start, buddy." Axel didn't reply. He didn't need to. He walked over to the toy chest by the wall, a relic from a life before, and nosed it open. From inside, he pulled out a faded stuffed bear, then carried it over to the couch. Gently, he placed it beside Ellie's hand. She stirred, blinked, and looked down. Then she pulled the bear to her chest and closed her eyes again. Lucas stared at Axel, his throat tightening. "You're better at this than I am," he said. Snow howled outside. The wind slammed against the walls like it wanted in, but inside, the stove burned steady. The room held firm. Lucas took out his old leather-bound notebook and began writing. Day 1. 2 girls found under pine shelter, 3:37 p.m. Names Emma and Ellie. Estimated age, 5. No visible trauma beyond exposure symptoms. Both responsive, 1 verbal, 1 quiet. No shoes, no outerwear. Blankets applied. Stove heat sufficient. Axel responsive, protective, comforting. He paused, then added. Ellie said, "He's the only one who didn't leave." Lucas closed the notebook. Outside, the snow would keep coming. The plows might not make it in the morning, and whoever left those girls might still be out there. But tonight, the cabin had waited long enough. And Axel hadn't left. He never would. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world muffled in white. The air outside was brittle, snapping cold, and the trees drooped under thick blankets of snow. It was the kind of silence that made the world feel paused, except for Axel. The German shepherd had been restless since dawn. Lucas noticed it right away. Axel wasn't pacing, but he wasn't relaxing either. His movements were focused, deliberate. He kept sniffing around the windows, tail low but stiff, like he was tracking something just out of reach. Lucas stepped onto the porch, boots crunching through the snow. Axel followed immediately, nose down, weaving through the drifts. "What is it, boy?" Axel didn't respond, not in any way Lucas needed to interpret. He moved past the old woodpile and into the trees behind the cabin. Lucas followed, rifle slung over his shoulder, pulse already picking up. 50 feet out, Axel stopped. His front paw hovered over the ground, then came down on what looked like just another patch of snow. Lucas moved beside him and squatted down. There it was, a boot print. Not his, not the girl's, smaller than his, wider than a child's, worn edges, faint but there, and not alone. Lucas scanned the ground and saw more impressions. 2, maybe 3 other prints, nearly swallowed by the snowfall, all facing away from the cabin. Whoever it was had stood here, watched, or waited. Axel let out a low growl and began digging. The sound of his paws tearing through snow was sharp in the morning stillness. Within seconds, Lucas saw the edge of something unnatural. Plastic. Lucas dropped to his knees and started helping, clearing away the snow until he could pull it free. A clear storage bag, sealed tight, covered in frost but dry inside. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded blue folder, thick with documents. Lucas carried it back to the cabin without a word, Axel never leaving his side. Back. Inside, Emma and Ellie were still asleep, curled together under the quilt. Axel took up position near them as Lucas sat at the kitchen table, lantern light flickering across the page as he opened the folder. At the top, a court letter. It was dated nearly 2 years prior. The name at the center of it, Rachel Voss. Appointed temporary guardian of 2 minors, Emma and Ellie Benson, due to the incapacitation of their biological mother, Laura Benson. Lucas kept reading. The court had authorized emergency placement following a motor vehicle accident that left Laura in a coma. No immediate family could be contacted, except for a distant cousin, Rachel. Lucas scanned the rest. There were food assistance forms, Medicaid documentation. A copy of Rachel's ID, early 30s, pale blue eyes, straight blonde hair. Smiling in the photo, but the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Beneath that, 2 photographs. One of the twins at around age 2, playing in what looked like a daycare center. The other showed Rachel crouched behind them, hands on their shoulders. But there was a stiffness in the image, a coldness in her grip. Lucas stared at the woman's face for a long time. Axel shifted near the fire, then stood, walked across the room, and rested his head gently on Lucas's leg. Lucas whispered, "She's the one, isn't she?" Axel didn't move, didn't blink. Lucas turned on the radio again. It took a few minutes to find a clear frequency. "This is Hart. Come in, County Dispatch static. Then, go ahead, Hart." I found something. A folder, legal documents, photos. It names the guardian, Rachel Voss. Says the biological mother is Laura Benson. Coma, vehicle accident. Copy. Hold the line. Lucas waited. Minutes passed. Then the voice returned. Different this time. Older, deeper. "This is Deputy Harris." "Hart, that name's familiar. Rachel Voss went off the radar a month ago. She was last seen in a trailer park outside Larkfield. Evicted." No forwarding address. Lucas looked toward the girls. Emma was awake now, sitting up quietly, eyes fixed on Axel. And Laura Benson? He asked. She came out of the coma 3 weeks ago. Harris replied. Said her cousin was supposed to bring the girls. But she hasn't been able to reach her. Filed a report. No one took it seriously. Until now, Lucas stood slowly. She said someone might come. He muttered. Say again. Nothing. I'll hold the folder. Tell Benson her daughters are alive. Tell her they're safe. For now, copy that. We'll update the report. We'll send someone as soon as the road clears. Lucas turned off the radio and looked back at Emma. She was watching him, but not in fear. Something softer, uncertain. He walked over and knelt down. Emma, do you remember someone named Rachel? Her jaw clenched, and she looked at the ground. She said we were supposed to be quiet. She said if we were quiet, people would leave us alone. Lucas swallowed hard. She ever hurt you? Emma didn't answer, but she looked at Axel and whispered. He barked once, and she yelled. She didn't like him. Said he looked too smart. Axel tilted his head, sensing her voice shift. He walked over and placed his chin on her lap. She smiled. Faint, almost invisible. Lucas sat down on the floor beside them. Rachel had been here. That much was clear. The documents weren't forgotten. They were buried, deliberately, which meant she was trying to erase something, or someone, and if she had come this close once, she could come again. Lucas's eyes drifted toward the cabin door. He would reinforce the windows, bolt the frames, keep the girls in sight. He didn't know what Rachel wanted, but he knew what Axel had found, and he trusted the dog more than he trusted most people. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not yet. The snow had settled into a deceptive stillness. Outside, the trees stood like silent sentries, motionless under a heavy sky. But Lucas' heart didn't believe in stillness anymore. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what the girls had said. Inside the cabin, the air was warm, thick with wood smoke and the faint scent of oatmeal. Ellie sat at the small kitchen table colouring with a half-broken crayon she'd found in the drawer. Emma sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, one hand resting gently on Axel's back. The dog didn't move, only adjusted his weight slightly to lean into her. Lucas crouched near the wood stove, checking the damper, listening to the low voice on the radio just behind him. We confirmed it. Deputy Harris said through the static. Rachel Voss skipped town 2 weeks ago, sold her car in cash. Last confirmed sighting was at a diner outside Missoula. She paid with food stamps and didn't leave a name. Lucas exhaled through his nose. And the mother? Laura Benson. She's at Crest Ridge Medical. Still recovering. Severe memory fragmentation. She's asking about the girls, but she doesn't even know they're alive. Lucas stood, slowly. Then someone needs to tell her. We're working on it. But until the road's clear, you're it, Hart. You're the only one between those girls and whatever comes next. He glanced toward Emma, who hadn't said a word since yesterday. Not to him, anyway. Copy, Lucas said. Then he clicked off the radio. He turned, and Emma was watching him now. Not afraid, not trusting either, just watching. Lucas walked over, sat on the floor a few feet away. Axel stayed between them like a translator no one acknowledged out loud. You feel like telling me anything today? He asked gently. Emma didn't answer, but she looked down at Axel, and something about the way her fingers curled into his fur said she was trying to find the words. Then she whispered, We weren't quiet enough. Lucas's brows pulled together. What do you mean? Emma didn't look up. That's why she stopped liking us. She said we were supposed to be good, be small, be quiet. But sometimes, Ellie cried at night, and I laughed once. I wasn't supposed to. Lucas said nothing. He felt the old heat rise behind his ribs. That familiar, helpless anger, the kind that built when you knew someone had done something unforgivable, and the law might be too late. Emma leaned forward, pressing her forehead to Axel's back. She said people don't like noise. That if we made trouble, we'd disappear like Mama did. Lucas swallowed hard. Axel let out a quiet huff, not quite a sigh, and stayed completely still beneath her. Lucas stood and crossed to the small cabinet near the door. He opened it, pulled out a box marked with duct tape and dust. Inside, a weatherproof trail cam, a pair of night vision binoculars, and a tactical flashlight. He'd left that life behind, but it hadn't left him. He grabbed his tool belt from the wall hook and walked outside without a word. Axel stood to follow. Emma reached out instinctively, then stopped herself. "He'll be back," Lucas said over his shoulder. "He always comes back." Outside, the cold bit through his coat, but Lucas didn't care. He moved fast, planting the first trail cam facing the road. The second went behind the cabin, facing the woods. The third he angled toward the tree line where Axel had found the boot prints. By the time he was done, his fingers were numb, and the sun was slipping low behind the clouds. He turned toward the cabin and scanned the tree line again. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about what those girls had carried in silence. Inside, Ellie was humming now. Quiet, soft A-tune that probably came from nowhere. Emma had climbed onto the couch, curled under a thick quilt, Axel pressed close at her side. Lucas locked the doors, checked the latches on the windows, and set the rifle within arm's reach near the front wall. The wind picked up again, howling against the cabin like something ancient and angry. Lucas didn't flinch. He looked at Axel, then at the girls. If Rachel came back, she wouldn't find helpless children. She wouldn't find a broken man hiding in the woods. She'd find something else entirely. A protector with teeth, a soldier with nothing left to lose, and two little girls who finally knew what it meant to be watched over. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel like fear. It felt like waiting. The wind came back with a fury that night, howling through the trees like it remembered everything. Snow lashed at the windows, and the temperature plummeted so fast that even the wood stove seemed to struggle against the cold. Inside the cabin, Lucas sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes on the girls asleep under a pile of blankets. Axel lay between them and the door, unmoving, but fully awake. His ears twitched at every creak, every shift in the wind. He had not slept in hours. Lucas couldn't sleep. Either the cameras outside hadn't picked up anything since he'd installed them, but something in his gut told him that silence was a trick. Rachel hadn't disappeared into the wind. People like her didn't just give up. They waited. They watched. And when you finally let your guard down, they came back. He was staring into the fire when it happened. Axel growled. Not the low warning he gave when deer passed by or when ice cracked on the roof. This was deep, guttural, a sound that came from a place older than memory. Lucas stood in a breath. Axel was already at the door, body stiff, tail straight, hackles raised. Then the door handle jiggled. Lucas reached for the rifle without thinking. Heart steady, hands calm. Another sound, this time from the side window. A shadow, movement, and then the crash. The window to the kitchen exploded inward, glass scattering across the counter. A figure dropped into the cabin with a heavy thud. The girls screamed. Rachel Voss. She looked nothing like the woman in the photo. Her face was sunken, hair wild and matted. A torn winter coat hung off her like borrowed skin. In one hand, she held a long, jagged knife. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, darting between the girls and the door. "You think you can take them from me?" she shrieked, voice cracked and high. "You think they're better off with strangers?" Lucas stepped forward, rifle aimed, but not fired. Not yet. You need to put the knife down." "They ruined everything," Rachel screamed. "I gave up my life for them, my job, my friends. Do you know what it cost me to keep them fed?" "They're not yours," Lucas said, voice flat. "You left them in the woods to die." Rachel lunged. It wasn't graceful. It was messy, wild, but it was fast. Lucas didn't have time to fire. Axel moved first. He launched from the side, slamming into Rachel's legs with all his weight. The knife skittered across the floor as she hit the ground hard, air bursting from her lungs. Before she could scream again, Lucas was on top of her, knee on her back, pinning her arms. "Don't move!" he growled. The girls were crying, curled in the corner. Axel stood between them and the chaos, tail still high, body locked. Lucas reached for the radio, clipped to his belt. "Dispatch, this is Hart. Suspect in custody. Repeat. Rachel Voss is here. Armed. I have her restrained. Need backup now." The voice on the other end responded fast. "Sheriff's team is en route. ETA 4 minutes. Hold position." Rachel was still struggling beneath him. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "They were never supposed to stay this long. She was supposed to die. I told them the girls died in the fire. I needed the money. I needed—" Lucas pressed harder. "You needed control." Axel stood over her now, staring down with unblinking judgment. Moments later, headlights cut through the storm. Sheriff Monroe's SUV slid to a stop in front of the cabin. 2 deputies poured out behind him, weapons drawn, eyes wide with disbelief as they took in the scene. Monroe, a broad man with tired eyes and a voice made of gravel, knelt beside Rachel as they cuffed her. "You're done, Rachel," he said. She didn't answer. Her mouth worked like she still wanted to justify it, but the words wouldn't come. Inside the cabin, Lucas knelt beside the girls. Ellie was sobbing into her sister's shoulder. Emma shook silently, wide-eyed and frozen. Axel sat down beside them. He didn't nudge, didn't lick, just stayed. And slowly, Emma reached out and grabbed his paw. Lucas whispered, "She's not coming back." Emma looked up. Axel's eyes met hers, and for the first time in days she nodded. The sky hung low that morning, heavy with quiet snow, the kind of soft grey light that blurred everything at the edges. It had only been a few hours since the sheriff took Rachel away, but the air already felt different, less tense, more waiting. Inside the cabin, the girls sat by the fire, swaddled in quilts, their eyes tracking every sound. Lucas made hot tea with a drop of honey, not because they asked for it, but because he didn't know what else to do. Neither had spoken since the night before. Axel lay between them again, head resting on his paws, his gaze constantly drifting toward the door. It was almost noon when Monroe's radio call came through. "She's here." 10 minutes out, Lucas clicked the radio off and turned to the girls. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. "Someone who's been looking for you a very long time." Emma's shoulders tightened. Ellie looked up with wide eyes. She didn't speak, but her hand found Emma's beneath the blanket and held it tight. Lucas didn't say more. He let Axel stay close, his presence the only translator either girl seemed to trust. 10 minutes later, the rumble of tires broke the hush outside. The girls stiffened. Axel stood immediately and walked to the door without a sound. Lucas opened it before the knock came. A woman stepped out of the back seat of the SUV. She was small, barely over 5 feet, wrapped in a heavy coat that looked too big on her frame. Her auburn hair was pulled back, her skin pale with exhaustion. She stood still for a second, eyes fixed on the doorway like she wasn't sure it was real. "Laura Benson?" Lucas asked. She nodded slowly. Her voice trembled. "They told me. They said my daughters, that they're here." Lucas stepped aside, gesturing toward the fire. Axel moved first. He approached her with a deliberate slowness, sniffed her coat, and let out a low, soft huff. Then he stepped aside. That's when the girls appeared in the doorway behind Lucas. They didn't run. They didn't cry. They just stood there. Emma stared at the woman as if looking at a ghost. Ellie took a single step forward. Her voice broke as it came out. "Mama?" Laura's knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She dropped her bag and reached her hands out. "Oh my God! Oh, sweet girls!" Emma didn't move, but Ellie ran first, crashing into her mother's arms. Laura wrapped herself around her like she was trying to keep her from vanishing. Emma stood, frozen, watching. Axel looked at her, just once. Then he nudged her with his nose. Emma took a small step, then another. She walked towards them, her eyes locked on Laura's face. And when she reached them, she whispered, "Is it really you?" Laura opened her arms wider. "It's really me." And then Emma collapsed into her mother's embrace. All three of them sank to the floor, tangled together, sobbing without sound. Axel sat beside them. He didn't move. He didn't look away. His ears relaxed, his posture loose, but his eyes never left the door. Lucas turned toward the fire, giving them space. But his eyes burned anyway. After a while, Laura looked up. "Thank you," she said, barely more than a breath. Lucas didn't answer. He just gave a quiet nod and walked outside. The snow had started falling again, soft and slow. He stood on the porch, breath fogging the air, arms crossed against the cold. Axel stepped out behind him a few moments later, pausing at his side. Lucas didn't look down. "You brought them to this point, didn't you?" he said quietly. "You found them." "You stayed." Axel gave no answer, just sat beside him, shoulder pressed to his leg. Inside the cabin, the sound of a mother whispering to her children drifted through the window. Outside, the snow kept falling, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like peace. The courthouse was a pale, windowless box in the center of town. Functional, not inviting. It sat beneath a slate-gray sky that hadn't broken all morning, as if the weather itself understood what was about to happen inside. Lucas stood at the front entrance, a borrowed suit jacket slung over one shoulder, the tie awkward against his neck. Axel sat at his heel, his coat freshly brushed, a badge-shaped medallion clipped to his collar. They'd both been requested to appear, officially as witnesses, but everyone in the sheriff's office knew that without Axel, the girls might not have survived. Inside, the courtroom was already filling. Reporters in the back rows scribbled quietly. A child protection advocate sat beside Laura, who had traded her hospital scrubs for a simple black dress. Her face was tight, her hands clutched in her lap, but her eyes never left the double doors at the front of the room. The bailiff called order. The defendant was brought in. Rachel Voss looked nothing like the woman who'd lunged through Lucas's cabin window with a knife. She wore a prison-issued grey sweatshirt, hands cuffed in front of her hair flattened and dull. She glanced around the room with hollow eyes, trying to appear composed, but it was an act everyone saw through. The judge entered, Margaret Ellis, a no-nonsense type with silver hair, pulled into a tight twist, and a gaze that had convicted worse people for less. She looked once at the file in front of her, then raised her eyes to Rachel. "Rachel Voss," she said clearly. "You stand charged with multiple counts, including child abandonment, endangerment of minors, fraud, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Rachel's attorney stood and replied quietly, "Not guilty, Your Honor." Judge Ellis nodded. "Then let's proceed." The prosecution moved quickly. Evidence was read aloud. The forged documents, the false address, the food stamp abuse, the medical neglect, the lies she told about the girl's mother being dead, the night she left 2 children in the woods with no food, no coats, no way back. Lucas was called to the stand. He kept it simple. I found them, he said. Emma and Ellie. Alone, barefoot, in the snow, no signs of shelter. They'd been out there for hours. If my dog hadn't tracked them. He looked down at Axel, sitting calmly beside the witness box, tail still. They wouldn't have made it. The prosecutor paused, then asked, "Did the girls indicate why they were left behind?" Lucas nodded once. "One of them told me. She said we were too much trouble." The courtroom went silent. Laura testified next. Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. She spoke of waking from the coma, of trying to find her daughters, of being told they'd died in a fire. She never looked at Rachel. Axel was never asked to speak, but when Judge Ellis requested that the canine in question be identified for the record, Lucas tapped the medallion on his collar. He's the reason they're alive. He's the one who heard them first. When it was Rachel's turn to speak, she tried. She cried. She said things like, "No one helped me, and I didn't have a choice." But no one in that courtroom blinked. The jury took 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. When Judge Ellis read the sentence, 15 years without parole for the first 10, Rachel didn't flinch. It was like she already knew how this would end. No one clapped, no one cheered, but everyone, in some small, quiet way, exhaled. Afterward, in the hallway, Laura hugged Lucas for the first time. "Thank you," she said, voice cracked from emotion. "For staying." For not walking away, he shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the one who wouldn't stop barking." Axel sat beside them, gaze steady, tail thudding once against the floor. They didn't stay long after that. The press tried to catch quotes, but Monroe blocked them with a few choice words and a long arm. He drove Laura and the girls home himself. Lucas and Axel walked back to the truck in silence. At the driver's door, Lucas paused. "You know," he said, glancing down at Axel, "you're going to be in a textbook someday." Axel just blinked, gave a low huff, and jumped into the passenger seat. They pulled away from the courthouse as the first flurries of another snowstorm began to fall, soft and slow. And this time, Lucas didn't mind. The town hall hadn't seen a full crowd in years. But that Saturday morning, folding chairs filled fast, and even the cold outside couldn't stop neighbors from showing up. Farmers, teachers, retired vets, a few teenagers with snow still stuck to their boots. Each one found a place to sit or stand, all for the same reason. It wasn't just about a ceremony. It was about what Axel had done, about who he had become to this town, even if most of them hadn't known his name a month ago. The old community center smelled faintly of coffee, wood polish, and something sweet someone had baked for the occasion. A makeshift stage had been set at the front with a podium, the sheriff's department flag to one side, and a large photo of Axel, black and tan, alert, proud, printed and hung beside it. Lucas stood off to the side of the room, shoulders stiff in his pressed flannel shirt and jacket. He'd polished his boots that morning, something he hadn't done in years. He kept a hand resting loosely on Axel's back as people filtered in, offering nods, quiet smiles, a few grateful pats on the dog's head. Axel didn't seem to care for the attention, but he stayed still, calm, ready. Sheriff Monroe stepped up to the podium. The man looked cleaner than usual, but still wore his duty belt, and his voice rumbled like gravel when he began. "Most of you know by now what happened 2 weeks ago, but stories like this deserve more than whispers or headlines. They deserve names. They deserve truth." He paused, letting his eyes settle on the twins sitting in the front row beside their mother. Emma's hand rested on Axel's paw. Ellie leaned against Laura, a ribbon pinned in her hair. Monroe cleared his throat. "We honor many forms of courage in this town. Firefighters, police, soldiers. But sometimes the bravest one in the room doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes he wears fur." The crowd chuckled softly, respectfully. Monroe held up a small red box and opened it to reveal a bronze medallion, shaped like a badge with a paw print in the center. Around the edge, engraved in block letters, "For service beyond instinct. For courage without command." The North County Sheriff's Office is proud to award the K-9 Civilian Medal of Courage to Axel, for saving the lives of Emma and Ellie Benson, and for reminding all of us what loyalty looks like. A ripple of applause rolled through the room, gentle but steady. Lucas gave Axel a look, then stepped forward with him onto the stage. Monroe bent down, not an easy thing for him, and gently clipped the ribbon around Axel's neck. Axel gave a slight shake, as if confused by the weight, but he stood tall. Cameras clicked. Phones were lifted, but none of it reached the moment, until Emma stood. She climbed the steps with Laura right behind her, turned toward the microphone Monroe adjusted, to her height, and looked out across the room with her small hands gripping the edges of the podium. Her voice was soft, but the room fell silent. "He found us," she said, before we disappeared. That was it. No one moved. A few gasps were swallowed down in the back row. Monroe dropped his gaze to the floor. Laura pulled her daughter into a hug, and Ellie reached up to hold both their hands. Lucas blinked hard, then gave Axel a scratch behind the ear. "You earned it, buddy," he murmured. Later, when the crowd had thinned and people lingered to offer thanks or cookies wrapped in napkins, Lucas stepped outside for air. Snow had started to fall again, light and drifting. He leaned against the porch rail of the town hall, arms crossed, watching the street. Axel sat beside him, his new medal catching just a little silver from the sky. "You hate crowds," Lucas said. Axel let out a short breath, almost like agreement. Lucas looked down. "Me too." Inside, Emma was still talking to a few people. A local paper wanted to write about Axel. Some family from another county had driven in just to shake Lucas's hand. It was kind, it was deserved, but for Lucas, the only thing that mattered had already been said. He found us before we disappeared. That was the truth. That was Axel. Not just a search and rescue dog, not just a companion, but the one who stayed, the one who watched, the one who barked when no one else did. And when Lucas looked at him now, medal or not, he didn't see a pet. He saw a partner. He saw the reason those girls still had a future. And in that cold, quiet moment, standing in the snow that never seemed to stop falling, Lucas finally let himself believe something he hadn't in years. Maybe heroes didn't always wear a badge. Sometimes they just refused to leave. The house was small, just a 2-bedroom cottage with weathered siding, a sunken porch, and a chain-link fence that creaked in the wind. But to Laura, it was everything she needed. To Emma and Ellie, it was safety. And to Axel, it was home. 1 month had passed since the trial. The town had moved on the way towns do. Headlines faded. Curiosity gave way to routines. But for Lucas, life had finally found a quieter rhythm, one that didn't start with gunfire or end with guilt. The girls were enrolled in school now. They took the bus in the morning, bundled up in matching coats, their hair tied in ribbons that flapped like flags. Axel walked them to the corner every day, sat until the doors closed, then trotted back to the porch like clockwork. In the afternoons, Lucas taught them how to dig up soil for a small garden beside the fence. They planted carrots and lettuce and one stubborn tomato vine that refused to stay upright. Ellie called it the rebel plant. Emma drew signs for each row. Axel supervised by lying in the dirt with a bored face, tail wagging just enough to catch their laughter. Sometimes Lucas caught himself smiling just watching them. It still surprised him. He hadn't realized how long it had been since his house held that sound. Children's voices, light and unafraid. For years, silence had been his only company, save for Axel's quiet breathing and the distant hum of regret. But now it was different. Now the air smelled like soap and crayons. Now someone left notes on his fridge that said things like, "Don't forget snack for field trip," and "Ellie says the tomatoes need a pep talk." Now he wasn't just existing, he was healing. One Saturday night, while Laura read aloud from a book by the fireplace and the twins leaned against her shoulders half asleep, Lucas stepped outside with Axel. The sky was pitch dark. Stars cut through the black like pinholes in cloth. The air smelled like pine and early frost. Lucas sat on the porch steps, arms resting on his knees. Axel sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You know," Lucas said softly, "I don't think I ever really knew what home meant." Not until now Axel tilted his head. Lucas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small tin box. It had once held peppermints. Now it held something far more valuable. The top was covered in pink and blue marker scribbles drawn in the crooked handwriting of 2 5-year-olds. In shaky letters it read, "Thank you for not walking away." Lucas swallowed hard. He opened the box. Inside was a torn ribbon from the school spelling bee, a friendship bracelet made of yarn, and a faded photo of Axel with the twins, his ears up, their cheeks smudged with dirt and grins. He closed the box gently and set it on the step beside him. "I didn't stay because I'm strong," he said, half to himself, half to the dog. "I stayed because I had no one left." And somehow that gave me enough reason to keep going. Axel nudged the box with his nose. "Yeah," Lucas said, "but you stayed too." Long before I knew I needed you inside, Laura laughed at something Emma said. The sound filtered out into the night. Safe, steady. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it stayed, just like Axel had, just like the girls were learning to, and maybe, just maybe, like Lucas would. Tomorrow would bring more work, therapy sessions, vet appointments, maybe another call from a search and rescue unit asking if Axel could help train a younger dog. But tonight was still. Tonight, a soldier who once wanted to disappear sat beside a dog who refused to let him. And in the warmth of that silence, one truth settled in Lucas's heart for good. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a beginning. So now I want to ask you, yes, you, watching this. What about you? Has anyone, animal or human, ever stayed for you when no one else did? If they have, tell them. And if they haven't, maybe it's time to become that someone. Thank you for listening. And if this story moved you even a little, subscribe, share, and help us keep telling stories that honor dogs like Axel, the German shepherd who stayed, even when it would have been easier to walk away.